I had learned, over the course of 12 years among the stars, that silence could be louder than gunfire. The Grand Convocation Hall of Aurelian Prime was built to impress and intimidate in equal measure. Its vaulted crystal arches rose so high they disappeared into a soft blue glow, refracting starlight filtered down from orbital mirrors. Every step echoed. Every breath felt judged. Thousands of delegates from 100 species filled the concentric tiers, their colors, scales, fur, and armor forming a living tapestry of galactic power. And yet, when the Queen's daughter ran into my arms, the hall fell so quiet I could hear my own heart trying to claw its way out of my chest. I was human. I was unarmed. And I was very, very out of place. The human at the edge of the galaxy. My name is Elias Ward, diplomatic attaché, Terran Union. That title sounded far more impressive than the reality. Humanity was still the new species on the interstellar stage, useful, curious, and quietly underestimated. We had no ancient empire, no planet-cracking fleets, no millennial-old royal bloodlines. What we had was persistence, adaptability, and an irritating habit of surviving things we statistically shouldn't. That was why I was standing at the outer ring of the Convocation Hall instead of seated among the great powers. Humans were observers today, not participants. The gathering was historic. The first appearance of Queen Zalithra of the Karuan Dominion in over 50 cycles. Her presence alone commanded fear. The Karuan were apex predators, towering, obsidian-scaled beings with bioluminescent crests and eyes like molten gold. They ruled a third of the Orion Arm, not through diplomacy, but through absolute dominance. Their queen was legend, and beside her throne stood Princess HFY. She was smaller than her mother, but no less striking. Her scales shimmered with softer hues, deep blues and silvers instead of black, and her crest pulsed faintly, betraying nerves she clearly struggled to control. She was young by Karuan standards, perhaps the equivalent of late adolescence. Her gaze swept the hall as the Queen spoke, lingering on every delegation, measuring, weighing. Then, inexplicably, her eyes found me. I looked away immediately. You don't stare at royalty, especially not Karuan royalty. That kind of attention could get you killed. But I felt it, an odd pressure in my chest, like gravity had shifted slightly in my direction. A mission meant to fail. I wasn't supposed to matter today. My official task was simple: observe, record, and relay. The Terran Union wanted insight into the Dominion's intentions. Were they preparing for expansion? War? Alliance? Unofficially, I was there because humans were considered harmless, a neutral presence. Someone species like the Karuan would ignore. And that assumption had kept me alive more times than I could count. The Queen's voice resonated through the hall, amplified not by technology, but by the natural harmonics of her biology. The balance of power in this galaxy grows unstable, she declared. Weakness invites chaos. Chaos must be corrected. A ripple of tension passed through the delegates. Everyone knew what corrected meant when a Karuan said it. She spoke of borders, of obedience, of order enforced by strength. It was a speech meant to remind everyone why the Dominion was feared. Throughout it all, Princess HFY remained silent, but her eyes kept drifting back to me. I told myself I was imagining it. Then the Queen finished speaking, and everything went wrong. The moment the world froze. It began with a tremor. Not physical, emotional. The air shifted, charged with sudden alarm. Karuan guards along the central aisle stiffened, their bioweapons flexing instinctively. Princess HFY swayed. At first, I thought she was ill. Her crest flared wildly, bioluminescence spiking into frantic patterns. She took a step back from the throne, claws scraping against the polished crystal floor. Princess. Queen Zalithra rumbled, her voice edged with rare concern. HFY didn't answer. Her gaze locked onto me with an intensity that made my breath hitch. Then she ran. Not toward her mother. Not toward her guards. Toward me. Gasps erupted across the hall. Delegates recoiled. Guards shouted in harsh Karuan commands as they surged forward, weapons priming. I didn't move. I couldn't. A 7-foot alien princess barreled straight toward a human observer standing alone at the edge of galactic politics. Logic screamed at me to step aside. Survival instinct urged me to flee. But something else, older, deeper, held me in place. HFY reached me in seconds. And then she threw herself into my arms. Her momentum nearly knocked me off my feet. Instinctively, I wrapped my arms around her, more to keep us both upright than out of affection. Her body trembled violently. I found you, she whispered, her voice barely audible, translated through the hall's universal matrices. I knew I would. The convocation hall erupted into chaos. Accusations and blades. Seize the human. The queen's command cracked like thunder. Karuan guards surrounded us in a heartbeat, towering forms bristling with lethal intent. Their weapons hummed, biological cannons charging with enough energy to vaporize me instantly. Delegates shouted in panic. Some fled their seats. Others leaned forward in morbid fascination. I slowly raised my hands, careful not to release HFY. She clung to me desperately, claws digging into the fabric of my jacket. Your Majesty, I said, forcing calm into my voice, I don't know what's happening. Release my daughter, Queen Zalithra snarled, rising from her throne. Now. HFY shook her head violently. No, she said. Don't make me go back. Please. The word please sent another shockwave through the hall. Karuan royalty did not beg. The queen froze. Her eyes narrowed, not at me, but at her daughter. HFY, she said slowly, dangerously. Explain yourself. The princess pressed her forehead against my chest, her bioluminescence dimming as if she were exhausted beyond measure. He's the one from my dreams, she whispered. The quiet place. The warmth. The hands that didn't hurt. My mind reeled. Dreams? Queen Zalithra's gaze snapped back to me, sharp enough to flay skin. What have you done to her, human? Nothing, I said honestly. I swear on Earth, I've never met her before today. That was true. But it wasn't the whole story. The forgotten experiment. Years ago, before humanity had formal contact with half the species in this room, we had discovered something strange. Human neural patterns were compatible, not technologically, biologically, emotionally. During early FTL experimentation, human researchers had detected low-level psionic resonance, nothing useful, nothing weaponized. Just enough to suggest that human minds were unusually open, unusually receptive. Most species evolved barriers, mental armor to protect against predators or hive influences. Humans evolved empathy instead. We didn't broadcast thoughts. We listened. What we hadn't known was who might be listening back. Princess HFY had been born psionically sensitive in a species that valued dominance over vulnerability. Her abilities frightened the Dominion scientists. So they did what empires always did to inconvenient children. They experimented. They placed her in isolation tanks, sensory deprivation chambers, psychic null fields. They tried to crush the weakness out of her. Instead, her mind reached outward, across stars, across species. And it found me. Not Elias Ward the diplomat, but Elias Ward the man, years ago, alone on a deep space research station after an accident that killed my crew. I had spent months in silence, talking aloud to keep from losing my sanity. Apparently, someone had been listening. "Truth under the stars," she bonded, said a thin, insectoid delegate from the Velas Collective, its mandibles clicking in awe. A spontaneous, long-range, empathic imprint. Queen Zalithra turned on the speaker with a snarl that promised death, but the damage was done. The hall buzzed with realization. Estiare lifted her head and looked up at her mother. "When they hurt me," she said softly, "he was there. He didn't know, but he was kind. He talked about stars and rain and music. He cried when he thought no one could hear." My throat tightened. I remembered those nights. The endless dark. The way speaking into the void felt like screaming into nothing. Apparently, it hadn't been nothing. I held on to him, as Heir continued, because he was the only place that didn't hurt. Queen Zalithra's expression shifted, not to rage, but to something far more dangerous. Guilt. "You were never meant to remember," the queen said quietly. "I remembered everything," Estiare replied. "And now I choose." She turned back to me. "I choose him." A choice that changed the galaxy. Silence reclaimed the hall. The queen descended from her throne, each step heavy with the weight of an empire. She stopped an arm's length from me, towering, terrible, magnificent. "For a human," she said, "you have caused more disruption in a single moment than entire fleets." "I didn't mean to," I replied. "I know." Her eyes softened, just a fraction. "The Dominion cannot afford a broken heir," she said. "Nor can it afford to ignore what you represent." She looked around the hall, at the watching galaxy. "Humanity," she declared, "has shown itself to be compatible." Murmurs rippled outward. "Therefore," the queen continued, "the Terran Union will no longer be observers." My heart pounded. "They will be protected allies of the Dominion," she said. "And this human, Elias Ward, will remain under my personal guarantee." Heir tightened her hold on me, relief washing through her bioluminescence like dawn. "You may stay," the queen said to her daughter. "But understand this. Your choice binds more than just your heart." Heir nodded. "I know," she said. "That's why I chose him." The human way forward. Months later, I stood on a balcony overlooking the obsidian spires of the Karuan capital. The galaxy was changing. Human embassies were opening across Dominion space. Trade routes flourished. Conflicts cooled, not because humanity was strong, but because we reminded others of something they had forgotten. Connection. Heir joined me, her presence warm and familiar in a way that still felt surreal. "They still stare," she said, amused. "Let them," I replied. "They're just trying to understand." She leaned against me, careful, gentle. "You saved me," she said. I shook my head. "No," I said. "You found me. There's a difference." She smiled, crest glowing softly. Far below, the stars stretched endless and bright. And somewhere out there, the galaxy whispered a new story, one where strength wasn't just measured in fleets and fear, but in the courage to run into the arms of someone kind, even when the whole universe was watching. Years later, historians would argue about the exact moment the balance of the galaxy shifted. Some claimed it was the signing of the human, Karuan Accord, when ancient warfleets were reassigned to protect trade lanes instead of conquering them. Others insisted it was when Queen Zalithra publicly dismantled the Dominion's psionic experimentation programs and exposed them to the Convocation, shattering centuries of unchallenged authority. But those who were truly there, those who felt the air change, knew the truth. It happened the moment a frightened young princess ran across a hall built for gods and monsters and chose safety over power. On the day Queen Zalithra finally stepped down, the ceremony was nothing like the brutal successions of old. There was no blood spilled on crystal floors, no challengers torn apart to prove worthiness. Instead, the queen placed her crown, an artifact older than humanity's written history, into HFY's hands. The new queen of the Karuan Dominion stood tall, her scales reflecting starlight rather than shadow. And beside her stood a human, not as a ruler, not as a weapon, but as something far more disruptive. A reminder. My people were taught that strength is taken, Queen HFY said, her voice carrying effortlessly across the gathered worlds. I learned that strength can also be given. Her gaze found me, steady and unashamed. The galaxy feared us, she continued. Now it will know us. And it will know humanity, not as prey, not as conquerors, but as those who listen when others are alone. There was no applause at first. Then slowly one delegate rose. Then another. And another. Until the convocation hall stood as one, not in fear, but in acknowledgement. Later, as the stars ignited beyond the palace windows, HFY and I stood together in the quiet that followed history being made. Do you ever regret it? She asked softly. That day, I thought of the silence before she ran. The weapons. The terror. The impossible choice. Then I thought of this moment. Of peace carved not by force, but by understanding. No, I said. That day taught the galaxy something important. She tilted her head, curious. That even in a universe built on power, I said, the bravest thing anyone can do is run toward kindness. HFY smiled, and the stars seemed a little closer. And far across the galaxy, countless beings would one day learn the same lesson, because once, in a hall of kings and queens, everyone stopped in shock, and humanity was finally seen.